Peace, family. It's your brother Marc Lamont Hill. You are watching the Marc Lamont Hill YouTube channel. Thank you so much for watching. We're going to get started. Once again, welcome to Night School. Night School is our nightly attempt, Monday through Thursday, to break down, to examine, to understand some of the most important issues going on in the world. Every single night, I will be here Monday through Thursday to help you break it down, to help you understand, to help us expand some of the most pressing issues going on, whether it's politics, whether it's pop culture, whether it's the field of science or education or politics, doesn't matter. We are going to break it all down. And we're going to get started right away by talking about Carlee Russell. Carlee Russell, the Alabama girl who confessed to lying about being abducted, has managed to avoid jail time. If you don't remember, Russell went viral last summer after she called police, claiming that she saw a baby on the side of a road. She then pretended that she was kidnapped. She disappeared, no one could see her, and then she just returned a few days later at her parents' house. She was facing up to a year behind bars. A lot of people thought that she was going to receive a year behind bars. A lot of people thought that at best she would get 1 year because of not just the graveness of the crime, but also the extraordinary amount of attention that was given to the crime. They said, well, with all this attention, with all this stuff that has happened, she will have to. Well, she wasn't given jail time. Instead, she was given a fine of $18,000. That's for restitution. She also has been asked to pay 100 hours of community service to the local community as well. So $18,000 in restitution and 100 hours of community service. During this time, she expressed regret for what happened. She apologized to the judge. She said that she wanted to make it right. And this was the judge's effort to get her to make it right. A lot of people upset about this. A lot of people out in the world were not happy that Carlee Russell did not get jail time, significant jail time. At the time of the crime, people said that once she was caught lying or found to be lying, they said she needs to do years in prison. I was one of the people at the time who said she doesn't need to go to prison. Anybody who fakes their own abduction, who pretends to be kidnapped, that literally ghosts on family and friends for days at a time, has mental issues. They're dealing with something. That is not a normal response. That is not a common response to just disappear and pretend. So if a person has mental issues, why do we want them to spend their time in a cage? What kind of outcome do we want? And this is where the spirit of abolition comes in. A lot of times people say, prison abolition is unrealistic, that you can't just go around getting rid of police and prisons. Well, here's a situation where you can. Even if you have a police force in place, and even if you have prisons and jails around as a reality, what the spirit of abolition can do, what an abolitionist politics can do, is ask different questions. Instead of asking who did it and how do we punish them, we can ask who was harmed and how do we make them whole again. In this case, the question of who was harmed is answered by pointing to the extraordinary amount of energy, effort the local police department had to exert looking for her. People spent time trying to find this woman. People spent a lot of energy trying to find Carlee Russell. A lot of people were scared because of the announcement. The media was pressed because of the announcement. This all sounds like the energy of labor and money. So having her do community service and spend $18,000 in restitution seems like a fair response. But for some reason, some of y'all, a lot of time it'd be Black people. That's the crazy thing to me. A lot of time it'd be the Black people that actually want stiffer penalties. They want her to be locked. I promise you, locking up this woman for a year or two is not going to make anybody's life better. It's not going to make anybody safer. And this is what um, this is what the judge said, that it wouldn't be a good use of resources. Someone writes in and says people could have died when resources were being used for her. They should have just investigated that. This is the thing again, you know, jail's not always the answer. It doesn't negate the point, which is, yeah, if all the police are looking for this missing woman, there may not be um an opportunity, for police to be available. There might not be police resources in place. I mean, all kinds of things can happen if all the police resources, all the fire resources, all the emergency medical resources, or all the child services resources are dedicated to something that's not real. So I get there's a real danger here, and we have to account for that. But getting a pound of flesh is not going to solve that. Getting a pound of flesh is not going to solve that. And that is why we have to move on. Anyway, speaking of moving on, let's move on to another story that I think is super important, and that is Ron DeSantis. Ron DeSantis is striking again. Yet another bill that criminalizes homelessness was passed today, this time in the state of Florida. No surprise there. Governor Ron DeSantis signed House Bill 1365. House Bill 1365 bans unhoused people from sleeping on streets, sidewalks, and in public parks. Areas for sleeping and camping sites will be designated by local government as long as they're approved by the Florida Department of Children and Families. However, these spots can only be used for 1 year. Residents and business owners can file lawsuits, civil lawsuits against counties if they allow people to sleep or camp without a permit. This bill is not uncommon, but remains quite disturbing. All around the country, we see lots of bills that are effectively intended to destroy, no other way to put it, to destroy the lives of homeless people, to undermine the mobility, the health, the prosperity, the recovery of unhoused communities. When you see anti-homelessness legislation, it often doesn't present itself explicitly as anti-homelessness. You can't pass a bill that says, the war against homeless people. Let's pass the no homeless people bill. No, they make it a ban against public camping. They make it a ban against public loitering. They make it a ban that is pro something as opposed to anti something. It makes it seem as if all they're trying to do is protect the interests of other people. And this is what Ron DeSantis effectively said when the bill came through, right? And again, this is a Republican legislature, so it wasn't that hard to get it through. But what he said basically was that people have a right to not be bothered in the state. That people have a right to be protected from homelessness and from people who are camping in public property. Ron DeSantis said, and I quote, "You should not be accosted by a homeless like we see. You should be able to walk down the street and live your life." All around the country, we're seeing these kinds of bills. These bills simply criminalize homelessness. We see the criminalization of poverty in this country in many, many ways. Since 2017, the number of people who have experienced homelessness or who are experiencing homelessness has risen by more than 8%. This is a striking number in Florida, right? More than, and you're talking about 653,000 people across the United States. More than 50,000 of those people are living in deep South states, including Florida. In fact, if you look at Florida, at least 30,000 people are unhoused. The state has the third highest rate of homelessness in the U.S. behind California and New York. And what do you do in the United States when you have a blemish, when you have a social contradiction, when you have a crisis, do you invest in it? No. Do you medicalize it, i.e., provide medical treatment? No. Do you socialize it, providing social services and welfare and such, other kinds of state safety nets? No. You penalize it. You criminalize it. You make it illegal. We made it illegal to be homeless in this country. We closed mental health facilities in this country and then locked people up after they ended up on the street after the mental health facilities closed. It means we criminalized mental health, mental illness. We get rid of drug treatment, and then you have homeless people on the street, and then we criminalize drugs. You're criminalizing drug addiction. We're effectively taking all of our worst issues, our worst contradictions, and we're criminalizing them. And homelessness is yet another one. But it plays in places like Florida. Because in places like Florida, all they want to be able to say is we're tough. In Florida, they want to be able to say, we got tough on those lazy homeless people. They're the rich and the upper class, they have a quality of life that deserves to be protected. And again, excuse me 1 second. In this country, police are often seen as those who come to save the vulnerable. They get the cat out of the tree, they stop a person from being attacked. But the police force at the institutional level, at the structural level, are often intended to protect property, to protect the interests and the property of the powerful, of the ruling class. That is what the police are there for, as a systemic issue. And so this is an example of that. You got poor people, you got hungry people, you got people who need food, clothing, and shelter. And the response to that, as the number goes up, is to make more laws that erase them. Because in this country, what we really want to do is hide our contradictions. We don't want to fix them. We want to hide our contradictions. So if you have a big homeless population, that's outside and you don't want it to look like you have a homeless population, you just relocate them. Now, the shelter would be a great place to put them, but they also say they don't want to invest in shelters. They don't want to invest in any kind of publicly funded institution for the vulnerable. So instead of putting them in the shelter, we invest our money in jail. And then we put people in jail. And then we can exploit their labor in jail. We can hide them in jail. We can sell them $5 a minute phone calls, and we can put them in for-profit prisons that generate capital for people. The anti-homeless bills that we see are not merely a wrong-headed response to poverty. They represent a deeper, more fundamental problem. And that's the one that we need to talk about, and we need to think about a lot more than we have. All right. Let's move on to another story, though. Let's move on to another story, because there is, in the last week or so, a buzz on social media. You can always tell something interesting is about to happen, because on social media, you can start to hear and see and feel that buzz. And the buzz that I'm talking about right now has been, at least on Black Twitter, about the Freaknik documentary. There are people out there that know exactly what I'm talking about. Netflix announced a documentary recently. Hulu announced a documentary recently on Freaknik. Freaknik, of course, is an Atlanta street party rooted in Black Black school culture, Black university culture, that gained national attention, and people have been talking about it all the time. Maybe about a year ago, there was a trailer that leaked about the Freaknik documentary. There was a trailer that came out, uh, and people didn't know it was a trailer. People thought the whole film was out, and people were up in arms. And a lot of people were talking about whether their mamas or their grandmamas would be in the film. People were like, "Oh well, thing came out about Atlanta in the 80s and the 90s, and my mama, my grandmama, my my auntie, whatever, was in Atlanta. She went to Spelman, she went to Clark, she went to Morris Brown, whatever, Georgia State, whatever. She was in Atlanta in the 80s and 90s. She might be on this videotape. She might be in the footage. And we're worried about seeing our wife, our mother, our aunt, our grandmother, whatever, on this footage. And so that was kind of the source of it. It started off a little bit as a joke, but it really morphed into something else. It morphed into a real serious conversation about Freaknik and what it meant to even be at Freaknik, what it meant to be part of a culture, when it came to Freaknik, where certain things happened. It wasn't just that your grandmama and them was twerking. It's also there was sexual violence. It's also that there was rape culture pervasive at Freaknik. And so part of what a lot of us need to think about and needed to think about was not just what does your auntie and mama and grandmama look like on them videotapes, but where was your daddy? Where was your uncle? Where was your grandfather? Where was your father on them videotapes? What kind of culture did we create? And how did Freaknik become what it is? Now, a year ago, people pretended they saw the film. They hadn't seen it because it wasn't done yet. I know that for a fact. But people acted outraged. They said it was another attack on Black men. Black men were being attacked in the Freaknik documentary. I don't believe that was the case. Now, I haven't seen the Freaknik documentary yet, but I am in it. I was interviewed extensively for it, and I hope to watch it this weekend. And I know that an attempt was being made to tell a full and robust story about this event. But still, once again, in the last week, now that it's out, people are again talking about whose mama and whose auntie and etc. is in this video. Can we please stop obsessing about the sexual activity, the way that women use their bodies, the way that women have fun? All this stuff is just it's shaming women. It's bound up in these respectability politics, and that's a term I hate using because it gets overused. But when it comes to this issue, that's exactly what's happening. Instead of that, can we please think about how this wonderful event that starts in DC and starts with, some spring break people. You get the DC club going, you get the spring breakers together, and they create something that's wholesome for Black people, for Black college students. And it grows into a national, maybe even international event, legendary. How does it get co-opted? How does it become something that not only takes over the city of Atlanta, but in some ways blemishes the name of the city of Atlanta? And I'm not saying it's fair. I think, a lot of attention was given, a lot of negative attention was placed on Freaknik that was unfair. But also a lot of attention was paid because of the violence, because of the way that this small college campus centered event became something that was bigger than college, that was bigger than the students, that became the city, and it became rap promoters, and it became outsiders, and it became all this stuff. I mean, I was at Freaknik. I was outside in the 90s. Some of y'all that wasn't outside. Some of y'all was too young to be outside. But I was outside in the 90s. I remember being at Freaknik, spring of 96. I remember what we were doing outside. I remember what we witnessed outside. I remember the good, clean, wholesome fun. I remember the Black love. I remember the joy, but I also remember some wild shit that happened. I remember girls getting pulled down off of cars. I remember people butt ass naked in the middle of 85 South. I remember all of that. I remember going there looking for fun, going there looking to see things that we had never seen before. I remember my homies came down from Philly, and this is pre iPhone, this is pre videos, so we weren't looking to make footage for social media. There was no such thing. We were just looking to have fun. And they had heard wild stories, and so they were looking for wild things to happen. Now, a whole lot of our time just got spent stuck on the highway because by the 90s, you couldn't move on Freaknik weekend in Atlanta. But, just getting to the clubs, getting to the parties, trying to get outside, trying to do this, trying to do that. We just saw so much, and it's what we were expecting. It was just normalized, and that story needs to be told. So I said 1995, the traffic was a force, though. It was. You get on 85 North going up to Buckhead from West End like we would, and because that's what we thought, some stuff was gonna be popping off. You might be on the highway for 3 or 4 hours, but black folk don't let no traffic stop them. All it meant was on the highway became a party. The highway became Freaknik. On the side of the road, this shit was wild. What I saw on the side of the road of Freaknik in the 80s. I mean, in the 90s, excuse me. And the strip clubs, don't even get me started. On Metropolitan Ave, which before was called Stewart Ave in Atlanta. Them old school hole in the wall, or West End, Montrese, them hole in the wall strip clubs. During Freaknik weekend, things just escalated and doubled. And you could see a culture of again, you can see a culture of violence. You can see a culture of all kinds of stuff that, again, isn't like native to black people. It's not native to black culture. But it's part of American culture. I'm reading y'all comments out here. But Lamont in his 2XL throwback jersey with the jean pants and Air Force. Shit, this is before even that style came through, man. I'm trying to tell you. He was like Stewart, aka more. Yo, it was different in the 90s, y'all. I'm trying to tell y'all, it was a different world. It was a different world. It was a different time, y'all. The 90s was something else, y'all. But every era, I don't want to be that person acting like our era was the coolest, our era was the best. But I don't know. That's all I can say. We had our fun. But we also had some deeply pathological shit happening. Like I don't want to understate that either. I don't want to understate that either. Like we had some good stuff happening. We had some amazing stuff happening. We also had some terrible stuff happening, and it's the terribleness that prompts films like the Freaknik documentary, and it's why I want to make sure that we highlight it, that we tell that story, because that story needs to be told, and I'm glad somebody's actually telling it right now. Let's move on to another story, because this has been super interesting, what's been happening the last few days. And we're going to talk about the war on Gaza. We're going to give the war on Gaza update before we go. So I don't want y'all to think that that's not going to happen. It's absolutely going to happen. Before we get into the war on Gaza proper, I want to talk about American Muslims. For the last few days, it has become clear that American Muslim groups, that Palestinian groups, and that other Black, brown, and other religious groups in solidarity are going to be boycotting the White House. Earlier this week, leaders of Arab and Muslim American community groups rejected an invitation to meet with President Joe Biden. And now it's expected that the White House will not be hosting its annual iftar dinner. The reason is that the Muslim American community is opposed to the Biden administration's funding of the current action in Israel, the Israeli genocide of the Palestinian people on the Gaza Strip. And there's a collective understanding among Muslim American community leaders that they should decline the offer to have a dinner if an invitation were to come. This is a major shift in how politics, national level politics, has engaged Islam in the last couple of decades. Since the 90s, there have been iftar in the White House. And iftar, by the way, if people don't know, is the breaking of a fast. And so during the month of Ramadan, once it is permissible to break one's fast, there's an iftar dinner every day. And the White House was starting to sponsor those. And if they didn't sponsor an iftar, they sponsored or welcomed Muslim community members to Eid al-Fitr, or the kind of festival of the breaking of the fast that happens at the end of Ramadan. Well, the Muslim community said, we're good. Muslim community was like, look, President Biden, we would rather not. And the White House has been very careful to avoid any kind of Ramadan-based event programming, not because they don't care about Muslims, but because they don't want to get embarrassed by Muslims. The White House wants to avoid a public relations disaster. In 2000, even under George Bush in 2000 and from to 2008, there was pushback, but the Bush administration attempted to welcome the Muslim community in because it would look like progress. The Obama administration was good about the iftar and the Eid, and it looked like progress. Even under Trump, they made the invitation, but now the concern is further embarrassment. The Biden presidency, the Biden administration was embarrassed about what happened in Michigan during the primary season when over 100,000 people voted uncommitted to Joe Biden. That was embarrassing. And right now, as the Biden administration continues to fail on the issue of Israel-Palestine, it continues to shame itself in the international community's eyes by continuing to fund, by continuing to stand next to Israel at a moment where it is violating international law, at a moment where Palestinians are being killed at an unprecedented record pace this time around. At a moment where all that's happening, the United States refuses to stand with any significant distance from Israel. Now, today there's been talk of a call for a ceasefire, which we'll talk about later. There's been talk about a resolution in the UN Security Council, but it's still temporary. It's still too little in the minds of many people. It's still too late. And so when you got Muslims who say, look, we are not going to spend a minute in the White House giving cover to President Biden as he prosecutes this war, when you have brown people and Muslims and even and African-American Muslims as well in solidarity saying, no, we're not going to stand separated on this issue. When all of that is happening, it makes Biden very vulnerable, because the last thing that the Biden administration wants to see is a protest. The last thing they want is people standing up and speaking out. The last thing they want is people not showing up. And so it's going to be tough. And it ain't just Ramadan. It's also affecting Nowruz, which is the Persian New Year, which is celebrated by diaspora groups of a variety of ethnicities and a variety of religious affiliations, from of course, Iran, but also from Iraq, from Afghanistan, from India, from Pakistan, from Turkey, from Tajikistan, from Azerbaijan, from Uzbekistan to Kazakhstan. You got all these people who are saying, look, we're standing with Palestine. And so the Biden administration when all this is happening, the Biden administration is running scared. But the real issue here is that despite the fact that they're running scared, the Biden administration won't just do the right thing. See, running scared could be an opportunity to say, you know what, we're going to call for a permanent ceasefire. We're not going to veto UN Security Council resolutions from other countries against Israel. We're not going to carry the water anymore. That could be one way to respond to these kinds of threats of embarrassment and shame and protest. But instead, they want to thread the needle. They're not trying to stop the issue. It's just like I said earlier about the US with homelessness, right? It's not about stopping the problem. It's about hiding the problem. And that's what the Biden administration is doing right now. And there is a very serious problem in Gaza right now. And that brings me to our last topic of the night, the topic that we absolutely talk about every single night here in Night School and here on the Marc Lamont Hill official YouTube channel, and that is Israel's war on Gaza. Israel's war on Gaza has now reached day 167. This is not surprising. This is not breaking news, but the death toll continues to go up. As of today, there are at least 31,988 Palestinians who have been killed since October 7th. There have also been 74,188 Palestinians who have been wounded in Israeli attacks on Gaza since October 7th. And of course, the death toll in Israel stands at since October 7th from Hamas's attack stands at 1,139, with dozens who have been taken captive. The war on Gaza is not hyperbole. We call it a war on Gaza because at this point, there's not even a pretense of fairness or equity or military parity. This is a full-scale, one-sided war that is not even primarily, much less exclusively, affecting members of Hamas. This is a war that is largely being prosecuted against Palestinian innocent people, Palestinian civilians, Palestinian children, Palestinian mothers. And that continues to play out this way. Earlier today, or even last night, Israel's military announced that it had killed about 90 gunmen and arrested 160 people in a raid on Gaza's Al-Shifa hospital. An allegation that the Palestinian group Hamas has denied. Al-Shifa, of course, is the Gaza Strip's biggest hospital before the war, and it is now one of the few healthcare facilities partially operational in the north of the territory, and had also been housing displaced civilians. So Al-Shifa is a major hospital, and one of the few operational hospitals left because they've destroyed them all. The Israeli military has destroyed them all. And now they're saying that Al-Shifa is filled with Hamas and agents and militants, and therefore it had to be attacked too. And so large parts of the hospital were stormed. Large parts of the hospital were attacked. Gunmen allegedly were in there, and so they were destroying all kinds of stuff. As a result, Israel has now ordered Palestinians to evacuate Al-Shifa hospital, and they're threatening to blow up all of it if they don't. They're literally saying that they're going to blow up the entire hospital. The World Health Organization says that it lost contact with medical personnel at Al-Shifa hospital. And so right now, they don't know how patients are doing. They don't know what's happening with medical staff. They don't know who's in there or what. Can you imagine a hospital being stormed and bombed, being attacked and sieged, such that you don't know if the patients are okay, you don't know if the doctors are okay, you don't know anything. This is unthinkable on so many levels. So much going on. I do want to point out, as we announce the death toll every day, that some U.S. Republicans are questioning the death toll. On a video call with U.S. Republican senators on Wednesday, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu estimated the death toll in Gaza to be 28,000. That's according to Senator Josh Hawley, who spoke to the New York Times. Now, 2 months ago, Israel said that the Gaza Ministry of Health's death toll numbers were accurate. The UN has said that they're accurate in the past. They've been within 4% of other organizations in the past. There's no reason to question the Gaza Ministry's numbers. And in fact, there are 8,000 people under the rubble right now. So the numbers are probably too low, not too high. But they continue to major in the minor. Whether the number is 28,000 or 32,000, that is still an unthinkable and an insane number. And the fact that this is happening in Rafah, in Gaza City, in Khan Yunis, in Jabali, and all over the country, all over the strip, is evidence that this isn't a singular problem, but it's a multi-pronged problem, right? You got El Shifa Hospital, which is a problem right now. And it's been a problem since the beginning in terms of people being attacked. Also the power being shut off, also fuel being taken away, also electricity being taken away. All of this is a problem, but that's not the only problem. You also have an attempt to starve people, as we've seen consistently. The UN numbers, the humanitarian organizations, everybody has pointed to the failure to get food and medicine and other humanitarian resources into the region. That's not because Palestinians don't want it. It's not because Palestinians are refusing it. It's because Israel's not allowing food trucks in. It's not allowing humanitarian aid in for months now. And we're just starting to see some movement on that, even though it's a violation, again, of not just international law and humanitarian convention. It's also directly in opposition to the orders given to them by the International Court of Justice in January. And yet, despite this, Netanyahu says, we're going to keep fighting Hamas. But fighting Hamas just becomes secret agent talk for what's really happening, which, again, is a mass strike against the Palestinian people. We're talking about something ugly here. And with 1.5 million people in Rafah in the south, Netanyahu is talking about a ground invasion, even though the entire international community has continued to say this will create more of a humanitarian disaster. So the big news today is that Netanyahu continues to focus on Rafah, and El Shifa Hospital continues to be targeted. And right now they're threatening to blow up the whole, literally blow up the entire hospital if everyone doesn't leave. And if blowing up that hospital, the major medical organ of the Gaza Strip, would spell disaster for the Palestinian people. And there seems to be no move toward a ceasefire. So this is all the latest news and the latest action here from the Gaza Strip. What we're going to do now, and we're gonna call it a night here at Night School. But I'm going to be back in about 10 minutes with a live Q&A called Office Hours. And during office hours, I'll take your live questions and answers. So thank you for watching. We'll be back later. Peace.